Lena had always been a quiet girl, the kind who spoke more with her eyes than with her voice. Music had been her language since she was small, the piano her way of saying everything she couldn't explain in words. Whenever life felt too heavy or confusing, she would sit at the old wooden piano in her living room and play until the world made sense again. So, when she finally gathered enough courage to audition at the community music hall, it felt like a big step, bigger than she let anyone know. The hall was famous for discovering new talent, and every year dozens of skilled musicians came to try their luck. It wasn't a small stage. It wasn't a casual competition. For many, including Lena, it felt like a door that could open to a different future. The morning of the audition was chilly. The kind of cold that made your fingers stiff and your breath float in the air. Lena arrived early, hoping to warm up and settle her nerves before the crowd grew. She wore a simple white blouse and dark trousers. Nothing fancy, but clean and confident. Her long hair was tied back. Her hands trembled just a little as she carried her sheet music. Inside the hall, other contestants were already practicing. Some played loud, flashy pieces, trying to show off their skill even before stepping on stage. Others whispered nervously to each other, checking and rechecking their music sheets. Lena found a small corner near the side wall where she could warm up quietly. She gently pressed a few keys on the practice piano, letting her fingers loosen one note at a time. Everything around her felt big and overwhelming: the tall ceilings, the elegant chandeliers, the echo of instruments bouncing off the walls. She tried to focus on the music, but her mind kept drifting to what the judges might think. As she continued warming up, a small group of contestants passed by. They were around her age, maybe a little older. One of them, a boy with sharp features and a confident posture, glanced at her and smirked. She didn't know him, but he carried himself like someone who believed he already owned the stage. He stopped for a moment, listening to her soft warm-up notes. Then he leaned toward the girl beside him and said, loud enough for Lena to hear, "Listen to that. She plays like she's scared of the piano. Why is she even here?" His friends chuckled. Lena froze. Her fingers stopped mid-note. She kept her eyes on the keys, pretending not to have heard anything, but her chest tightened. Her breath grew shallow. A familiar wave of self-doubt washed over her wave she thought she had left behind. The boy continued, adding just a little louder, "This place is for real musicians. Not for someone who can barely press the keys." Another laugh. Another sting Lena swallowed hard. She wanted to disappear into the corner. She wanted to tell herself that his words didn't matter, that they were just noise. But the truth was, they hurt. Because they echoed every insecurity she carried with her. She tried to remind herself why she came. She remembered the nights she used to play the piano for her mother, would sit beside her, listening with a smile so warm that even mistakes felt beautiful. Her mother had always told her, if you play with your heart, people will feel it. Don't be afraid of being soft. Soft doesn't mean weak. Those words helped her breathe again. Just then, one of the volunteers called out her number, asking everyone to gather near the waiting area. Lena took a deep breath and stood up. She brushed her hands against her clothes, trying to calm the tremble in her fingers. She joined the line of contestants, each one carrying a mix of fear and hope. The audition hall looked even more intimidating from the inside. The judges sat at a long table, their faces focused and serious. Sheets of scoring papers lay in front of them, along with pens that clicked softly as they wrote notes. The stage was brighter than the rest of the room, as if the lights were designed to expose every flaw. Lena watched the first few contestants go before her. Some played brilliantly, filling the hall with complex melodies and fast fingerwork. Others stumbled, their nerves wrapping around their hands like tight ropes. Every applause or moment of silence felt heavy. When the confident boy from earlier played, he performed a loud, impressive piece with strong strokes and sharp transitions. The judges nodded at times and made notes quickly, clearly impressed by his boldness. The boy walked off stage wearing the same smirk he wore earlier, as though he had already won. Lena felt her heartbeat rise. She gently rubbed her hands together, trying to warm them. The room suddenly felt colder. When her number was called, she stepped forward slowly. Her legs felt heavier with each step toward the stage. She placed her sheet music on the piano stand, though she knew the piece by heart. She sat down carefully, adjusting the bench slightly. For a moment, she just stared at the black and white keys. They looked familiar, comforting, but her hand still hesitated. One judge cleared her throat softly. Lena took the cue and placed her hands on the keys. She played the first note soft, almost too soft. The second note came out slightly shaky. Her rhythm wobbled. She could feel the judges noticing. She could feel the confident boy watching from the back with folded arms. Her chest tightened again. The earlier comment replayed in her head, "She doesn't belong here." Her fingers felt heavy, her breath uneven, but then something shifted. Maybe it was memory. Maybe it was courage. Maybe it was the quiet echo of her mother's voice in her heart. She stopped for a brief second, not out of fear, but out of choice. She took one deep breath, a real one, a steady one. She closed her eyes for a heartbeat and let the noise of the hall fade away. She reminded herself what music meant to her: not competition, not judgment, not comparison, just expression. She opened her eyes again, and this time her hands felt lighter, steadier, connected. She reset her posture and began again. The first few notes were soft, but they were no longer unsure. They carried emotion, not fear. Her fingers started to glide across the keys more naturally, like they had done hundreds of times before in her living room. The hall felt different now, as if it recognized the change inside her. The judges looked up, not all at once, but slowly. One by one, as the music began to shape itself into something delicate but meaningful. Lena didn't look at them. She didn't look at anything except the keys. She let the story of the piece speak for her. She let the melody explain everything she couldn't say. Her nerves didn't disappear completely, but they softened. Just like her playing, gentle but strong in its own way. When she finished the first part of the piece, she felt a small sense of relief. The judges didn't react yet, but she could tell their attention was different now. They were listening. Really listening. She looked down at her hands. They weren't shaking anymore. In that quiet moment, she realized something. She did belong here. Maybe not to impress anyone or prove anything, but to share what she loved. And with that thought, she prepared to continue her performance, not knowing that the next moments would change everything. Lena sat at the piano, letting the last soft note of her warm-up fade into the heavy silence of the hall. She had managed to steady herself, but her heart still beat faster than usual. The stage lights felt brighter now, almost too bright, as if they were testing her confidence instead of simply illuminating the piano. Her fingers rested lightly on the keys, and she inhaled slowly, preparing for the main part of her piece. But the memory of her shaky start clung to her thoughts. She wondered if the judges had already decided she wasn't ready. She wondered if her earlier mistakes would overshadow everything she was about to do. One of the judges shifted in her seat, crossing her arms and waiting patiently for Lena to begin again. The others sat with pens ready, their expressions unreadable. They weren't unkind, but they weren't encouraging either. They were simply doing their job, watching, listening, judging. Lena tried not to look at them. Instead, she focused on something familiar, the smooth keys beneath her fingers. They had always been her comfort. She knew their shape, their weight, their quiet promise that music would always be there for her, no matter what else wavered. She closed her eyes for a second, remembering her mother's gentle words and the way she used to listen without ever rushing her. That memory softened her nerves just enough. When she opened her eyes again, she started playing. The beginning of the piece was simple, soft chords that built slowly like a sunrise. Her fingers moved carefully, not rushing, not forcing. The sound flowed out and filled the hall in a warm, gentle hush. The shift came gradually. Her playing grew more confident, each note clearer than the one before. She didn't think about the judges or the boy in the audience anymore. She didn't think about anything except the music she wanted to share. As she played, the room seemed to change. The earlier whispers and restless movements from the audience faded. Even the confident boy, who had watched her with folded arms and a smug grin, lowered his expression slightly. He wasn't smirking anymore. He was watching, and not because he wanted to judge, he was simply surprised. Lena felt none of that. She was lost in her own world, letting the melody guide her. The piece required both tenderness and strength, soft touches and bold surges. And she followed each shift with a natural ease that came from years of practice. Her fingers moved faster now, gliding across the piano in a flowing motion. The hall seemed to breathe with her, each note landing with quiet meaning. The judges exchanged glances, not dramatic ones, but subtle ones. The kind that happened when something unexpected caught their attention. One judge leaned slightly forward. Another stopped writing and simply listened. Lena didn't see any of it. She was living inside the music, but inside her heart, there was still a small tremor. Not fear, just the fragile hope that she could finish strong. That the judges would understand what her music meant to her as the piece reached its gentle midpoint. She let her hands slow down for a moment. The notes softened, becoming delicate and airy. The hall felt impossibly still, as if the room itself didn't want to breathe too loudly and disturb the moment. This was the part she loved most. The part that felt like telling a quiet secret. She played it with care, letting each note fall exactly as she imagined when she practiced alone at night. Her eyes softened. Her shoulders relaxed. For that moment, she forgot she was auditioning. She forgot she was being watched at all. She felt free. But that piece didn't last long. As the next section approached, her mind flickered back to the earlier comment she had overheard. The boy's voice replayed in her head. She plays like she's scared of the piano. Her fingers faltered for just a fraction of a second, small enough that the audience might not notice, but big enough that she felt it echo through her entire body. She took a quiet breath. She reminded herself that she had already come to. Far to let a stranger's words control the moment she had. Spent years preparing for, she pushed through the hesitation and found the rhythm again. The next part of the piece required confidence. Strong chords, steady hands, bold expression. It scared her a little. Not because she couldn't do it, but because she wasn't used to being bold in public. Her strength always lived quietly inside her, not in loud gestures or dramatic performances. But the piece demanded that she be fearless, at least for these next measures. So she made a choice. She wasn't playing for approval. She wasn't playing to prove anything to the boy who mocked her. She wasn't even playing for the judges. She was playing because this music meant something to her. With that thought, she lifted her hands slightly and struck the next notes with a confidence she didn't know she had. The sound filled the hall with renewed energy. The shift was immediate. The judges straightened subtly. A few members of the audience leaned forward. Her hands moved faster now, her posture growing stronger. She looked nothing like the girl who had walked onto the stage scared and unsure. She looked like someone who understood the heart of her music. The hall seemed brighter, the sound grander, the moment larger. But just as she started settling into this newfound confidence, a slight tremble returned to her fingers. It wasn't fear this time, it was the weight of the moment. She knew she was doing well. She also knew one mistake could shake her again. She breathed out slowly and tried to stay, connected to the melody instead of the pressure. Her mind wandered for a second, remembering all the times she wanted to give up when her relatives told her piano wasn't practical, when classmates laughed at her for bringing music sheets to school, when she struggled with pieces that seemed impossible, but she had never quit. Not once. That realization grounded her again. The music softened, and grew louder, then softened again, like waves shifting in slow motion. Lena followed each change carefully, letting her emotions guide her fingertips. The audience remained unusually quiet. Not bored, engaged, waiting, listening. Even the judges, usually wrote continuously, paused during certain sections. One judge tapped her pencil absent-mindedly, as if she wasn't sure whether to take notes or let the moment wash over her. Lena didn't know any of this. She was too focused, but a part of her, the part that had been insecure her entire life, felt something she hadn't felt before. She was doing it, not perfectly, not flawlessly, not without fear, but genuinely. And sometimes, that genuine mattered more. As she reached the final portion of the piece, her breathing steadied. Her hands felt warm instead of stiff. Her fingers moved with a confidence that felt new, and unfamiliar but welcome. Each note felt like a quiet statement, I belong here. I deserve to play. I have something to give. The last few measures approached, the ones she had practiced dozens of times. They were delicate, requiring both control and softness. Many performers rushed through them out of nerves, but Lena knew better. She slowed her pace, letting the emotion guide her instead of the fear. The final note held in the air, long and soft, fading slowly like a whisper. When it ended, the hall didn't make a sound. Not even a cough. Not even a shuffle. Just silence. The kind of silence that followed something expected. Lena lifted her hands slightly from the keys but didn't stand yet. She wasn't sure what the judges were thinking. She didn't know if they loved it or if they felt nothing at all. But she knew one thing clearly. This time, she had played the way she always wanted to play. Not hiding. Not shrinking. Not doubting every move. She sat quietly for a moment, letting the air settle. Then, she stood up slowly, giving a small nod to the judges, even though she couldn't bring herself to look directly at their faces. As she walked off stage, her heart raced again. Not from fear this time, but from the intensity of what she had just felt. She had given everything she could, and even if she didn't know it yet, the people watching her felt it too. Piano Story Part 3, Lena stepped away from the stage with her heart still pounding in her chest. The moment she had poured herself into was over, yet it kept echoing inside her like a quiet vibration. She took a seat in the waiting area, away from the rest of the contestants. Her hands were still warm from the piano keys. She kept rubbing her palms together, trying to calm the leftover nerves. She didn't dare look toward the judges. She didn't dare look toward the audience either. She felt safer with her eyes down, focusing on her breathing. The hall was full of people talking in low voices, discussing performances, whispering guesses about who might be selected. She heard bits and pieces of conversations floating around her, but none of them felt connected to her. She replayed her performance in her mind, especially the moment when her fingers had almost faltered. That tiny slip still made her stomach twist, even though she recovered quickly. She hoped the judges noticed her effort more than her fear. A small group of contestants walked past her, chatting loudly about their own performances. One of them glanced at Lena but quickly looked away. Another gave her a curious look as if trying to remember whether she had done well or not. Lena didn't mind. She wasn't here for attention, but someone else was. The same boy who had mocked her earlier. He stood across the room, leaning casually against the wall with his arms crossed. He wasn't talking much now. His friends surrounded him, but his eyes were fixed somewhere else. He seemed restless, almost irritated. Lena didn't want to look at him, but curiosity pulled her eyes toward his direction for a moment. She caught him staring back at her, not with amusement, not with superiority, but with something closer to surprise. It was as if he couldn't understand how the same girl he mocked had played the way she did. The moment their eyes met, he quickly looked away. This time, it was his confidence that seemed shaken. Lena looked down again, unsure what to think. She didn't want his attention. She didn't need his apology. She just wanted some quiet. A few minutes later, one of the organizers stepped into the waiting area and called out instructions for the next group. Lena wasn't part of that group, so she stayed where she was. Her mind drifted to her mother again. She wondered what her mother would say if she were sitting in the audience right now. She imagined her smiling, nodding, maybe even tearing up the way she used to whenever Lena played something emotional. For the first time since she arrived at the hall, Lena felt a small sense of pride growing in her chest. Not loud pride, just a gentle, private kind that didn't need applause. The room continued buzzing with conversation. Someone sat beside her, a girl with a friendly face and a soft voice. The girl offered a small smile and said, "You played really beautifully." Lena blinked, surprised. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I don't usually get emotional from piano pieces." The girl continued, "But yours. It felt different. I could feel it, you know? Like you weren't just playing notes." Lena felt warmth rise in her cheeks. "I'm glad it reached you," she said softly. The girl nodded and went back to joining her group. But her words lingered with Lena in the best way possible. For once, she didn't doubt whether her music mattered. Not long after, The confident boy from earlier walked by. He didn't stop. He didn't speak. But he slowed down near her, opened his mouth as if to say something, then closed it again. He seemed uncomfortable, almost embarrassed. His friends didn't seem to notice. Lena watched him leave without saying anything. She didn't know whether to feel annoyed, relieved, or indifferent. She decided to let the moment pass as the afternoon went on. More contestants finished performing, and the energy in the hall grew heavier with anticipation. The judges still hadn't announced anything. They were in the main room, discussing and watching recordings. Lena's stomach felt tight again. Waiting was harder than performing. To distract herself, she walked out into the small lobby area, where several posters of past winners hung on the walls. They looked confident, polished, established. She wondered if any of them had once felt as nervous as she did. She walked slowly along the hallway, taking in the pictures. Each one showed someone who had once stood exactly where she stood, someone who might have doubted their worth the same way she doubted hers. A deep breath settled her nerves again. She heard footsteps behind her. She didn't turn around immediately, hoping they would pass. But the footsteps stopped right near her when she finally looked. She saw the boy from before standing there. He didn't have the smug look anymore. In fact, he looked unsure of himself for the first time. "Hey," said quietly. Lena wasn't sure how to respond, so she simply nodded. He rubbed the back of his neck, shifting uncomfortably. "About earlier. What I said before you played, that was out of line?" Lena didn't say anything. "She waited, I thought." He continued slowly. "I thought you were just another contestant who came without practice. I shouldn't have judged you like that. Your performance, it wasn't what I expected." Lena didn't know if that last part was meant as a compliment or another backhanded remark, but his expression made it seem genuine. Still awkward, but genuine. "It's okay," she said softly. "I'm not here to prove anything." He looked at her, surprised by her gentle response. "Well, you kinda did," he admitted. "Anyway, I just wanted to say sorry. I shouldn't have said what I said." Lena offered a polite nod. "Thank you." He gave a small nod back and walked away quickly, as if relieved the interaction was over. Lena stood there for a moment, absorbing what just happened. She didn't feel triumphant or smug. She didn't feel like she had gotten revenge or taught him a lesson. She simply felt quiet gratitude that she had stayed, true to herself, and that her music had spoken louder than his words. When she returned to the main hall, she saw people gathering near the front. Something was happening. Murmurs filled the air and contestants began lining up again. A staff member announced, "The judges will reveal the preliminary results shortly. Please take your positions." Lena's heartbeat quickened again. She joined the line, standing behind a girl who kept bouncing nervously on her feet. The room grew louder as everyone tried to guess the outcome. The judges entered the hall one by one, carrying clipboards and papers. Their serious expressions made the room fall silent. Lena's heart thudded steadily in her chest. She reminded herself to breathe. One judge stepped forward, began speaking about the importance of dedication, originality, and emotional expression. She talked about how they weren't just looking for technical skill, but also the ability to connect with the audience. Lena listened carefully. Wondering if she fell into any of those categories, the judge continued, "Some performances surprised us. Some moved us deeply. And some showed us a strength we didn't expect." A soft murmur rippled through the crowd. Lena kept her eyes on the floor, after what felt like an eternity. The judges finally started announcing the names of those who had advanced to the next round. They called name after name. And each time someone stepped forward, applause filled the room. Lena's heartbeat grew louder, pounding harder. Was she going to hear her name? Or was she going to leave quietly without being noticed? When the judge paused before saying the final name, Lena felt her entire body tense. "And the last contestant moving forward is?" A breathless silence filled the hall. Lena froze. For a moment she wondered if she had heard it correctly. Her ears buzzed from the rush of adrenaline. The girl standing beside her nudged her gently with a smile. "That's you," she whispered. Lena stepped forward slowly, her legs trembling but her heart lifting in a way she couldn't describe. The audience clapped, not loudly, but warmly. She didn't look for the judges' reactions. She didn't look for the boys' reaction either. She simply stood in her new place among the advancing contestants, feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time. Pride, quiet, steady. Real pride. It settled in her chest like a small flame, soft, warm, and ready to grow. And though she didn't know what the next round would bring, she knew she had already crossed the biggest hurdle. She had stopped doubting her place, and for the first time, she let herself believe she could go even further. The next morning arrived more quietly than usual, yet something in the air felt different, almost tense. After everything that had happened during the performance and the unexpected praise that followed, there was still a strange mix of pride and uncertainty lingering inside him. He woke up early, long before the sun had climbed fully over the rooftops, sat on the edge of his bed wondering what the day would bring. He still couldn't understand why so many people suddenly cared about him, or why that one moment on the piano had shaken his life in ways he never expected. He walked into the kitchen, where the soft smell of breakfast drifted from the stove. His aunt glanced over with a small, tired smile, kind she used when she was thinking about something, but didn't want to say it out loud. She poured tea into a cup and pushed it gently toward him. They didn't speak much at first. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, just heavy with unasked questions. Finally, she sighed and looked at him with a seriousness that surprised him. "You know, yesterday changed things." "What?" she said softly. He didn't know how to reply, so he simply nodded. She continued, choosing her words carefully. "People saw what you can do, and some of them will expect more now." He knew she was right, but the thought made his stomach twist. He didn't mind playing the piano. He loved it, actually. But performing in front of people who judged him, whispered about him, or tried to embarrass him, he wasn't sure he was ready for all that again. Still, he didn't want to disappoint anyone, especially his aunt, who had supported him through everything. After breakfast, he stepped outside, hoping for some quiet. Instead, he found two kids from the neighborhood waiting near the front gate. They looked nervous, almost shy, and when they saw him, they straightened up quickly. One of them held a small pea part, for the days leading up to the next round passed slowly, yet every hour felt heavy with expectation. Lena tried to stay calm, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the stage, the judges, and the brief moment when her name was called. It felt unreal, like she had stepped into someone else's life. Her mother noticed the change in her. She didn't say much about it, but she prepared her meals with extra care, checked on her more often, and sometimes stood quietly near the door while Lena practiced. It was her silent way of showing support. Lena felt it every time she sat at the piano. On the third morning after the announcement, Lena woke up earlier than usual. The sun was barely up, the sky a soft gray blue. She walked to the living room where the piano stood and pressed a single key. Its sound filled the quiet room, warm and steady. She sat down and began practicing gently, letting the music flow without pressure. But as she played, she kept thinking about the next round. She wondered who she would face, what the judges expected, and whether the audience from last time would return. She wondered if the boy who had mocked her would be there too, and if he still felt embarrassed by his earlier words. It wasn't anger she felt toward him anymore, just curiosity. Sometimes people acted out of fear, and she wondered if his confidence had only been a mask. Her mind drifted as her fingers moved across the keys. She kept trying different melodies, hoping one of them would feel right for the next round. Nothing stuck. Everything sounded either too practiced or too safe. She wanted something new, something honest. Her mother walked into the room, tying her hair back as she approached. She stood behind Lena for a moment and listened. "That one is nice," she said softly. Lena shook her head. "It doesn't feel right. You're thinking too much," her mother said gently. "Let it come to you." Lena nodded, though she wasn't sure how to do that. Letting things come naturally wasn't always easy, especially now. Later that afternoon, she received a message from one of the organizers. It included the schedule for the next round and a polite reminder that contestants needed to arrive an hour early for warm-ups. She stared at the message for a long time, her stomach twisting with a mix of excitement and fear, when the day of the next round finally arrived. She dressed with care, choosing something simple and comfortable, She didn't want anything flashy. She just wanted to feel like herself. The hall looked different this time. The crowd was larger, the lighting brighter, and the atmosphere buzzed with tension. Contestants stood in small groups, whispering nervously or stretching their hands like athletes preparing for a big match. Lena walked quietly to the registration desk and signed in. The volunteer there gave her a warm, encouraging smile. "You're back," the volunteer said. "Your performance last time was beautiful." Lena thanked her shyly and moved toward the waiting area. She found an empty chair and sat down, placing her hands in her lap. She tried to focus on her breathing, but her heart kept racing. A familiar voice spoke beside her. "Hey!" She looked up. It was the boy from before. He seemed calmer than the last time she saw him, though his eyes still held some nervousness. "Hi," Lena said, unsure what else to add. He sat down a seat away from her, not too close, but not too far either. "So, you made it to this round," he said. Lena nodded. "You did too." He nodded back, tapping his fingers on his knee. "Listen, I know I apologized before, but I want to say it properly. You were great last time. Really great. I didn't expect it, and that's on me. I shouldn't have judged you before knowing anything." Lena studied his expression. He looked sincere, almost vulnerable. It made her see him differently, not as someone mean, but as someone who had been struggling to find his own place. "It's okay," Lena said gently. "Everyone has moments like that." He gave a small, grateful smile. "Thanks. And good luck today." "You too," she replied. As he left to join his group, Lena felt a sense of calm wash over her. The uneasiness she had felt toward him faded, replaced by a quiet understanding. Soon, the stage manager began calling contestants to the warm-up room. Lena followed the group inside. The room had 2 pianos and several chairs. People took turns practicing short sections of their pieces. When it was Lena's turn, she sat at the piano and gently pressed the keys. At first she played softly, testing the sound. Then she played a piece she had been working on the night before. But halfway through, she stopped. Something felt off. The music didn't feel like hers. She placed her hands in her lap and closed her eyes. She tried to remember the moment from the last round, the rush of emotion, the connection with the instrument, the sudden clarity. She wanted that feeling again, but it remained out of reach. A staff member called her name, signaling that it was almost her turn. She stood up, wiped her hands on her dress, and took a deep breath. As she waited near the stage entrance, she could hear the contestant before her finishing their piece. The audience clapped warmly. A few seconds later, the stage manager nodded to her. "You're next," he said. Lena stepped onto the stage. The lights were bright, and the crowd seemed larger than before. She walked to the piano slowly. Her heart beat loud in her ears. She sat down and placed her hands on the keys. For a moment, she froze. Her mind went blank. She could hear her own breathing echoing through the microphone. She looked at the judges. Some watched her closely, others flipped through their notes. Then she looked at the piano again, and something inside her shifted. She remembered her mother's words. "Let it come to you." So she closed her eyes. She didn't think about the piece she practiced. She didn't think about impressing the judges. She didn't think about anyone watching. She just played soft, slow, uncertain at first, like someone taking their first steps. Then stronger, fuller, warmer. The melody wasn't something she had practiced exactly. It was something new, something born from her feelings right then and there. Her fingers moved with a freedom she hadn't felt before. Every note carried weight, emotion, truth. She didn't know where the melody was leading her, but she followed it fearlessly. The audience fell silent. She felt the shift in the air, the same quiet stillness she had felt in the previous round. It was as if the room was leaning in to listen. When she reached the final notes, her fingers lingered on the keys. She let the last sound fade naturally. Gently, silence held the room for a moment. Then came the applause. It wasn't loud or explosive. It was deep and sincere, the kind that wrapped around her like a warm blanket. Lena stood up slowly and bowed. She didn't look at the judges. She didn't look for anyone in the crowd. She walked off the stage with a calmness she never expected. As she stepped backstage, the boy from earlier approached her with wide eyes. "That was," he said, struggling for words. "That was something else. I've never heard anything like that." Lena smiled softly. "Thank you. You didn't play the piece you practiced, did you?" he asked. She shook her head. "No." He laughed lightly, almost in disbelief. "I wish I had that kind of courage." Lena didn't know whether it was courage. It felt more like honesty. But she didn't try to explain. The rest of the afternoon passed in a mixture of waiting and soft chatter. Some contestants talked excitedly about their performances. Others sat in quiet worry. But Lena felt strangely peaceful. She had walked onto that stage scared. She had walked off stronger and deep down. She knew something important, no matter what the results were. She had played with her true voice, and that was enough for now. The morning after the competition, the world around the auditorium felt different. Even though nothing about the city had actually changed, the sky looked the same, the street noises were the same, and the vendors outside the bus stop were setting up their stalls just like they always did. But inside the music center, something new was unfolding, a quiet buzz, a sense of anticipation that felt almost unreal to the people who had been there the night before. News of her performance had spread through the city, faster than anyone expected. People who hadn't been able to attend were already replaying descriptions from friends. Some were talking about the way she played with so much heart, while others were still whispering about the judge who had tried to put her down earlier in the day. But most people couldn't get past one thing: the moment she touched the piano and changed the entire atmosphere of the room. She arrived early that day. Her steps were slow but steady, and there was a calmness on her face that hadn't been there before. She wasn't afraid anymore. Something about last night had shifted inside her. It wasn't only that she had performed well, it was that she had done it while staying true to herself. She didn't argue with anyone, didn't try to prove anything with words, and didn't let anyone push her into a corner. She just played, and sometimes that was enough. The staff recognized her immediately. Some smiled, some nodded, and others greeted her with a level of warmth she hadn't received during the earlier audition rounds. It was clear that things had changed. Even if no one said the words out loud, she made her way to the small practice room she had used the day before. The same piano sat in the corner, a little worn out, a little outdated but familiar. She sat before it, closed her eyes, and gently laid her fingers on the keys. She didn't play anything at first. She simply breathed. A few moments later, the door opened quietly. Her mentor stepped inside, watching her for a second before coming closer. "You did well yesterday," he said softly. She smiled faintly, brushing her fingers along the smooth keys. "I did what I could." "You did more than that," he said. "You reminded everyone why music exists." She didn't look up. She didn't need to. The room felt safe, familiar, and somehow brighter than it had ever felt before. "You know," her mentor continued, pulling a chair beside her, "there are some people who try to break a musician before they rise. Not because they are bad people, but because they believe the world is a competition. The only way to survive is to harden others." She finally looked at him, her expression calm. "But you don't believe that, do you?" "No," he said. "I believe that the softest hearts create the strongest music. And I believe you proved that last night." She looked down again, and without planning it, played a soft melody, one that hadn't been part of the competition. It wasn't dramatic or powerful. It was simple, quiet, and full of warmth. He listened silently. Outside the practice room, more staff members gathered. They didn't want to interrupt, but they couldn't help leaning in, drawn to the music. It felt different from the night before, yet equally captivating. It had no intention behind it, no pressure, no need to impress. It was simply her. After a while, she stopped. "I didn't think I could ever play freely again," she said. "I felt like I needed to prove myself at every step." Her mentor shook his head. "The only person you ever have to prove anything to is yourself. But even that shouldn't be a burden. It should be a journey." She absorbed those words quietly. Later that day, she was asked to meet with the head panel of the competition. She wasn't nervous this time. Her heart wasn't racing, and her hands weren't shaking. She walked into the room with steady steps. The same judges who watched her the night before sat in a semicircle. They looked more thoughtful today, less stern. Their posture seemed softer, as if they, too, had taken something from the previous night. The head judge spoke first. "We asked you here because we want to acknowledge something important. What you did yesterday was more than a performance. It reminded us of what we sometimes forget, that music is not about perfection. It's about expression, honesty, and presence." She listened quietly, her hands folded neatly. Another judge leaned forward. "Your confidence was tested. Not because you lacked talent, but because sometimes the world pushes back hardest at those who hold potential." The woman who mocked her confidence earlier lowered her eyes. It was clear she wanted to say something. And she did. "I was wrong," the judge said, her voice steady but sincere. "I misjudged you. I questioned your confidence because I mistook your calmness for lack of readiness. I see now that I was mistaken, and I'm sorry." The room was silent for a moment. She nodded gently. "I understand. Thank you for saying that." Her words weren't filled with bitterness or pride. They were genuine, carrying a softness that made even the judge who had challenged her feel relief. The head judge continued. "We would like to offer you something beyond this competition. A chance to perform at our annual showcase. Only a few musicians are invited each year, and your performance last night has earned that invitation." Her breath caught for a moment. She wasn't expecting this. "You mean, I get to play on the main stage?" She asked. "Yes," he said. "If you accept," she nodded slowly, unable to hide the small smile growing on her face, "I would love to." The room felt lighter now. And although she didn't know every detail of what would come next, she knew that this moment mattered. When she left the building, the city was brighter. People were walking in every direction, some carrying bags, some rushing to work, some taking their time with iced drinks in their hands. And she walked among them, blending in but feeling completely different. She took a long breath. For once, her thoughts weren't tangled or heavy. She wasn't questioning herself or wondering if she belonged. She wasn't replaying old doubts in her mind. Instead, she thought about the showcase. She thought about her mentor, the judges, and the people who stopped talking last night just to listen. And she thought about that moment she sat at the piano and let her heart guide her hands. Weeks passed, and the day of the showcase finally arrived. The auditorium was much larger than the competition hall. Lights hung from the ceiling like stars, and the main piano sat at the center of the stage, polished so perfectly that it reflected the glow of the room. Backstage, she stood with her hands clasped. She wasn't nervous, just thoughtful. Her mentor came up behind her. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded. "More than ever?" When her name was announced, she stepped onto the stage. The audience welcomed her with warm applause. Some people recognized her, some didn't. But none of that mattered. She approached the piano, took her seat, and breathed. And then she played. Not the same piece from the competition. Not something rehearsed for the sake of perfection. She played something new. Something she had written over the last few weeks, born from everything she had gone through. The melody rose gently at first, like the beginning of a quiet sunrise. Then it grew fuller, warmer, carrying emotion without force. The audience felt it not in a dramatic, overwhelming way, but in a deeply human way. Her hands moved across the keys with a freedom she had never known before. She wasn't performing for approval. She wasn't trying to prove her worth. She wasn't afraid of anyone's opinions. She was simply sharing a part of herself. When the final note faded into the air, the room stayed silent for a heartbeat. A long, meaningful silence. Then the applause began soft at first, then louder, spreading across the entire auditorium. She looked out at the crowd. Her chest felt warm, her eyes a bit glassy, but her smile was clear. She stood, bowed gently, and walked off stage. Her mentor met her with a proud smile. "You did it again," he said. She shook her head softly. "No, this time wasn't about doing something again. This time was about becoming who I was always supposed to be," he nodded, understanding completely. And as she stepped outside into the fresh evening air, She realized something important. Confidence wasn't about standing tall in front of others. It was about believing in your own voice, even when someone tries to silence it. And her music, once fragile and uncertain, now carried a strength that came from truth, not perfection. Her journey wasn't over. It was just beginning.